He bought her calling her weak, but she broke his empire from within. For men had entered Bong In-soo's inner circle believing they could outmaneuver him, and 4 bodies now lay beneath Seoul's foundations, their names erased from every ledger. By day, he was the Silent Dragon, a tattooed phantom who commanded Korea's most lethal syndicate with surgical precision. By night, he was a man caged by blood oaths and family legacy, proof that even absolute power could not grant freedom from the empire that owned him before he owned it. Across the Pacific in Chicago, Lisa Crouch sat in a sterile hospital waiting room surrounded by debt collection letters and her brother's discharge papers, calculating the price of her family's survival in numbers that didn't add up. When a 100-page contract arrived, her accounting expertise for 1 year in exchange for her family's complete financial erasure, she understood exactly what it was. Not opportunity, not fate, but a transaction. And so she signed, trading 1 year of her freedom for the lives of those she loved, unaware that the cage meant to hold her would instead become the key to dismantling everything he'd built. Welcome to the channel. Happy New Year to you all. As we step into this new year, I want to wish our amazing community a year filled with love, breakthrough, and incredible new beginnings. I'm so glad you've joined us for another powerful story. Whether this is your first time here or you're a long-time listener, I'm thrilled to have you in our community. Before we get started, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. It's the best way to support the stories you love. Also, I love seeing how far our stories travel. Leave a comment below and let me know which part of the world you're watching from today. Now, let's jump straight into the story. The mansion didn't announce itself. It simply existed, a sprawling compound of black stone and glass that swallowed 12 acres of Seoul's most exclusive hillside, surrounded by walls too high to be decorative and too smooth to be climbed. Lisa's escort, a man who had not spoken a single word during the 2-hour drive from Incheon Airport, guided her through a gate that opened without sound, into a courtyard where water fell in sheets down obsidian panels, turning the evening light into liquid shadow. She had expected opulence. She had not expected silence. The kind that pressed against eardrums and made breathing feel like an intrusion. Her heels clicked against polished floors the color of midnight, each step echoing through halls lined with art she recognized from auction catalogs. Pieces worth more than most people earned in lifetimes, displayed with the casual indifference of a man who had forgotten the concept of price. The escort stopped before a set of doors carved from single slabs of dark wood, knocked twice, and disappeared before she could ask a single question. Lisa straightened her jacket, the same one she'd worn to court hearings and IRS depositions, armor that had always made her feel competent. Here it felt like tissue paper. The doors opened from within. Bong In-soo did not rise from behind the desk. He simply watched her enter, his presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with the breadth of his shoulders or the expensive cut of his black suit. Tattoos emerged from his collar like smoke made permanent. Dragons and scripture and symbols she couldn't read, crawling up his neck and disappearing into his jawline. One hand rested on the desk surface, ink continuing across his knuckles in patterns that suggested both artistry and threat. His eyes tracked her with the clinical assessment of a man appraising livestock. Miss Crouch. His English carried only the faintest accent, smooth and deliberate. You are smaller than I expected. Lisa stopped 3 feet from the desk, refusing to fidget under his gaze. The contract didn't specify a height requirement. Something flickered across his face, not quite amusement but its dangerous cousin. He stood then, unfolding to his full height, and she understood immediately why 3 women had fled his presence. Not because he was cruel in his features, but because he occupied space like a predator occupied territory. Absolutely, without question, and with the patient certainty that everything within reach already belonged to him. He circled the desk, each step measured, until he stood close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker, something that made her hindbrain scream warnings her frontal lobe forced her to ignore. You will stay in the East Wing. His gaze traveled down her frame and back up, not with desire but with the assessment of a man cataloging an asset. You will not enter my private rooms. You will not speak to the staff about business. You will not leave the grounds without my explicit permission. He paused, reaching out to lift a strand of her braided hair between his fingers, examining it with the same detached curiosity one might show a curiosity in a museum. You are American. Fragile. Temporary. Lisa met his eyes, forcing steel into her voice even as her pulse hammered. The contract says 1 year. That's not temporary. That's a commitment. His hand dropped. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. A crack in the mask quickly sealed. Commitment. He repeated the word as if tasting something foreign. We will see if you last 3 months, Miss Crouch. Fragile things tend to break in places like this. He turned away, dismissing her with the gesture. Your room is prepared. Do not disappoint me by running before you've begun to understand what you've signed. The doors opened again, the silent escort reappearing to collect her. Lisa walked out with her spine straight and her hands steady, but she felt the weight of his gaze on her back like a brand, marking her as property in a world where property had a very short shelf life. Insoo thinks he bought a puppet. He has no idea he just invited his greatest enemy home. Subscribe to see his empire fall, and comment Lisa if you're ready for her revenge. The ledgers arrived at dawn, delivered by a woman in a charcoal suit who looked like she'd perfected the art of seeing nothing. She placed 3 leather-bound volumes and a laptop on the desk in Lisa's room without meeting her eyes, then vanished as silently as she'd come, leaving only the faint scent of jasmine and gunpowder. Lisa stared at them for a full minute before touching anything. In her previous life, she'd audited hedge funds and shell corporations, traced money through labyrinthine offshore accounts for the FBI, rebuilt financial records from fragments that white-collar criminals thought they'd destroyed. She knew what real books looked like. She knew what cooked books looked like. These were something else entirely. The first volume opened to handwritten entries in Korean and English, amounts listed in won, dollars, yuan, and currencies she had to look up. The transactions had no dates, only designations. Busan Port, containerized, Gangnam Development, consultation, Incheon Holdings, advisory fee. Every entry was bloodlessly professional. The language of legitimate business wrapped around activities she suspected were anything but. She worked through the morning, building spreadsheets, cross-referencing accounts, mapping the flow of capital through what appeared to be 17 different front companies. By noon, she'd identified the operational structure. A syndicate that moved money like water through a carefully engineered system of channels, each transaction appearing legal in isolation, damning only when viewed as a whole. By evening, she'd found the whole. It started small. A consulting fee to a company called Biko Enterprises that seemed slightly inflated. Then another payment, this one for security services, routed through the same entity. Lisa pulled up corporate registrations, tax filings, business licenses. Biko Enterprises existed on paper. Registered address in Songpa-gu, business license current, tax identification number valid. But it had no employees. No physical location. No phone number that worked. No website. No contracts with any other clients. It was a ghost, and it was eating Bong Insoo's empire alive. She ran the numbers again, then a third time, her coffee going cold as she traced the hemorrhage backward through 18 months of records. $12 million, siphoned in amounts carefully calibrated to stay beneath the threshold of immediate alarm. Not enough to cripple the syndicate, but enough to weaken it, month by month, like poison delivered in doses too small to taste. Someone was stealing from the silent dragon. Someone close enough to access these accounts, smart enough to hide it in plain sight, and bold enough to believe they could get away with it. The door opened without warning. Lisa's hand jerked toward her laptop, instinct screaming to close the spreadsheet, but Insoo was already inside, his presence filling the room like a pressure change before a storm. You have been working. Not a question. His eyes moved from her face to the ledgers spread across the desk, the laptop screen dense with formulas and highlighted cells. That's what you brought me here for. Lisa kept her voice level, professional, even as her heart hammered. She'd found something. Something that could get her killed or make her indispensable. She wasn't sure which outcome terrified her more. He moved closer, standing behind her chair, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. One tattooed hand reached past her shoulder to tap the screen, indicating a column of figures she'd marked in red. What is this? A thief. The words came out steadier than she felt. Someone in your organization has been stealing from you for at least 18 months. 12 million so far, Probably more if I go back further. She pulled up another tab, showing the ghost company's registration. Beco Enterprises. It doesn't exist. It's a shell, and someone's using it to drain your accounts dry. Silence. The kind that made the air feel thin. When Insoo finally spoke, his voice was soft, which somehow made it more dangerous. You have been here less than 24 hours, and you have found something my accountants have missed for over a year. Lisa turned in her chair to face him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. Your accountants aren't looking for ghosts. I am. She found the ghost in his books. The betrayal is closer than he thinks. Subscribe for the next twist and comment, "Traitor," if you think his own men will kill him first. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a building that didn't advertise its existence, accessible only by private elevator and the kind of wealth that rendered price meaningless. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seoul's glittering sprawl, the city reduced to ambient light for men who treated nations like game boards. Lisa had been dressed like a prop. The deep burgundy gown had appeared in her room that afternoon with no note, no explanation, only the implicit command that she wear it. It fit perfectly, which meant Insoo had known her measurements without asking, a violation so casual it barely registered among larger ones. She'd been positioned at the table like a decorative object. Silent, ornamental, proof of Insoo's ability to acquire beautiful things from distant places. The three men across from them had introduced themselves with names she immediately forgot, their smiles sharp enough to cut. They spoke in Korean and English interchangeably, code-switching as strategy, watching to see what she understood. Insoo sat at the head of the table with the stillness of a blade in its sheath, his tattooed hand resting near his wine glass, every gesture controlled to the point of menace. The conversation circled through pleasantries and into business with the inevitability of sharks finding blood. A shipping deal. Container routes from Busan to Los Angeles. Revenue projections. Risk assessment. The numbers floated through the air like abstractions. Millions discussed with the casualness most people reserved for lunch orders. Lisa listened, her face carefully neutral, her mind working through calculations she couldn't stop herself from running. Occupational hazard. She'd spent too many years reconstructing financial crimes to turn off the part of her brain that saw patterns in numbers, lies in margins. The lead negotiator, older, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than her former annual salary, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The operational costs we've outlined are standard for this volume. 23% overhead is quite reasonable given the regulatory complexity. Insoo's expression didn't change, but Lisa saw his fingers tighten fractionally on the stem of his wine glass. She shouldn't speak. She'd been brought here to be seen, not heard, to validate Insoo's power by her decorative presence. Opening her mouth would violate every implicit rule of this performance. That's not correct. The words left her mouth before wisdom could stop them. Silence dropped like a guillotine blade. Every eye turned toward her, the temperature in the room plummeting several degrees. The silver-haired man's smile froze into something crystalline and dangerous. Insoo's gaze found her with the weight of a physical touch, unreadable and absolute. Lisa forced herself to continue, her voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. 23% overhead on the volume you're discussing would put operational costs at approximately $18 million. But standard shipping overhead for that route and container capacity runs between 14 and 16%. You're inflating costs by at least $7 million. She reached across the table with the audacity of someone who'd already crossed the line and might as well sprint, pulling the contract draft toward her. Her finger traced down the columns of figures, each calculation damning. Here. And here. The fuel cost projections are based on prices from 8 months ago. Current rates would reduce this figure by $2.3 million. The insurance premiums you've listed are for hazardous materials classification, but you've specified standard commercial goods. The silver-haired man's face had gone carefully blank, the kind of emptiness that preceded violence. You're asking him to pay $31 million for something worth $23 million. That's not a negotiation. That's theft dressed in a contract. No one moved. No one breathed. The city glittered beyond the windows, indifferent to the tension coiling through the room like a living thing. Insu set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. When he spoke, his voice carried the softness of a drawn blade. "Gentlemen, I believe we need to renegotiate our terms." The meeting ended 20 minutes later, the deal restructured, millions saved. The three men left with stiff courtesy and murder in their eyes. Not for Insu, but for the American woman who'd exposed them. In the elevator descent, Insu stood beside her in silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "You just made yourself the most dangerous woman in Seoul." Lisa just humiliated a mafia boss to his face. Subscribe to see her power grow, and comment, "Queen," if you love a woman who doesn't back down. The gunshots came at 2 a.m, shattering the mansion's perpetual silence with a violence that jerked Lisa from uneasy sleep. 3 sharp cracks, then shouting in Korean, then the mechanical click of weapons being readied. She froze in her bed, every instinct screaming contradictory commands. Hide, run, stay perfectly still. Footsteps thundered past her door. More voices, urgent and lethal. Then nothing, just the electric quiet of aftermath, the kind that hummed with adrenaline and barely averted disaster. She was pulling on a robe when her door burst open. The same woman who delivered the ledgers stood there, her charcoal suit now torn at the shoulder, a thin line of blood running down her temple. "Come. Now." Lisa followed without question, bare feet silent on cold floors as they moved through corridors she'd never seen, down a staircase hidden behind what looked like a solid wall. The woman led her into a room that resembled a surgical suite. Stainless steel surfaces, medical equipment, the sharp smell of antiseptic barely masking something copper and organic. Insu sat on an examination table, his jacket and shirt discarded. His torso a canvas of ink and blood. A gash ran along his left ribs, deep enough that Lisa could see the muscle beneath, blood running down his side in rivulets that dripped onto the white floor. His face was pale but composed, his jaw set with the kind of control that came from intimate familiarity with pain. "Out." He spoke to the woman without looking away from Lisa. The woman hesitated, then obeyed, the door closing with a final click that felt like a lock engaging. They were alone. Lisa and a wounded predator, in a room designed for precisely this kind of emergency. "I don't know what you expect me to. The suture kit is in the cabinet. Local anesthetic in the second drawer." His voice was tight but steady. "My doctor is dead. He was in the car they hit." Lisa's stomach twisted, but her hands were already moving, pulling on gloves, gathering supplies. 8 years of college and graduate school hadn't included medical training, but she'd grown up with a mother who was a surgical nurse, had spent enough teenage hours in emergency rooms to know the basics. She approached him the way she'd approach a wounded animal. Carefully, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "This is going to hurt. Everything hurts." He said it without self-pity, just statement of fact. "Do it." She cleaned the wound first, trying not to think about the intimacy of touching him, her hands on his skin, tracing the edges of tattoos that covered him like armor made of ink. Dragons coiled around his ribs, their scales individual works of art. Scripture ran along his obliques in characters she couldn't read. A lotus bloomed over his heart, its petals so detailed she could see individual veins in each leaf. Who were they? She kept her voice level as she prepared the anesthetic, needing words to fill the space between them. The men from dinner. Or more likely, whoever they work for. He watched her hands, not her face. "You cost them $7 million and made them look foolish. Some insults require blood. They came for you because of me. It wasn't a question. They came for me because I let you speak. Because I didn't silence you when you challenged them." He exhaled slowly as she injected the local anesthetic. "Because I made a choice to value truth over face. That makes me weak in their eyes." Lisa threaded the needle, her hands steadier than they had any right to be. "You're not weak. You're bleeding because you're surrounded by thieves and cowards." Something changed in his expression, the mask cracking, the performance faltering. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge, becoming almost human. "Do you know what these mean?" He gestured to the tattoos covering his torso. "Each one is a sin, a death, a choice I cannot undo. I wear my empire on my skin because I cannot wash it off. The first suture pulled skin closed, and he didn't flinch. My father gave me this when I was 17. His finger traced the dragon coiling around his ribs. The day I killed my first man. I didn't want to. I begged him for another way. Lisa worked in silence, each stitch precise, closing the wound that someone had opened trying to kill him because she'd told the truth. There was no other way, he continued, quieter now. There never is. The silent dragon is bleeding, and only Lisa can save him. Is this love or a lethal trap? Subscribe now and comment, "Protect," if you want them to survive the night. The meeting happened in a place that didn't exist on any map, a private club beneath Gangnam's financial district, accessible only through a tea shop that closed its doors at 10 and opened them again at midnight for a clientele that preferred shadows to sunlight. Lisa descended stairs that smelled of old wood and older money, the burgundy dress Sue had chosen for her moving like liquid against her skin, every step calculated to draw eyes without appearing to seek them. Sue had been explicit in his instructions. She was to listen, to smile, to be the beautiful American curiosity that these men would underestimate. She was to learn who was loyal, who was ambitious, and who had already signed contracts written in his blood. The room opened before her like a theater designed for conspiracies. 5 tables arranged in a circle, each occupied by men whose combined wealth could buy nations. Guards lined the walls, statues with guns. And at the center, a space left deliberately empty, a stage for those brave or foolish enough to occupy it. Sue sat at the northernmost table. His presence a gravitational force even in a room full of predators. His eyes found her as she entered, and something passed between them. Not affection, not yet, but recognition. She was his weapon tonight, and they both knew it. She moved through the room like water finding cracks, stopping at each table with practiced grace. Her Korean was limited, but her smile needed no translation, and her questions were framed as innocent curiosity, the kind beautiful women were expected to have about powerful men and their empires. At the second table, a man old enough to be her grandfather asked where she'd learned to spot financial irregularities. She laughed, self-deprecating, and mentioned her background in forensic accounting, watching his eyes sharpen with interest. He asked if she'd examined all of Sue's accounts. She said only what she'd been shown, then let the silence stretch just long enough for him to imagine what she might have found. At the third table, younger men with American educations and European suits wanted to know if the rumors were true. Had she really embarrassed the Huang family in front of Sue? She smiled and said she'd simply corrected a mathematical error, that numbers didn't lie even when men did. One of them laughed too loudly, then caught himself, glancing nervously toward where the Huang representative sat with murder in his eyes. She collected pieces of intelligence like scattered jewels. A comment about shipping routes that shouldn't be common knowledge. A reference to our arrangement with Incheon Customs that suggested corruption deeper than she'd calculated. A joke about Biko Enterprises that died the moment it left someone's lips, replaced by sudden, careful silence. The ghost company. They knew about it. Or some of them did. Lisa excused herself to the powder room, a space lined with mirrors that reflected her from infinite angles, all of them wearing the same expression of careful neutrality. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen, recording everything while it was fresh. Names, comments, connections. The door opened behind her. A woman entered, older than Lisa, elegant in black silk, her hair silver and her eyes sharp as surgical tools. She didn't speak, just stood there washing her hands with deliberate slowness, watching Lisa in the mirror. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Crouch." The woman's English carried a British accent, boarding school perfect. These men don't like clever women. They like obedient ones. And which are you? Lisa met her eyes in the reflection. The woman smiled, a gesture both warm and lethal. "I'm the one who taught them to fear the difference." She dried her hands with careful precision. "Minji Park. I manage operations for the Jeju interests. And I've been waiting 20 years for someone to expose that ghost company for what it is." Lisa's pulse quickened, but her face remained neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Minji moved toward the door, then paused. The Biko accounts flow through 3 banks. One in Seoul, one in Singapore, one in Macau. The authorization codes change weekly, but the pattern doesn't. Fibonacci sequence, starting from the current date. She opened the door, light spilling in from the corridor. I'll expect Insu's gratitude to be appropriately generous when this is over. She vanished, leaving Lisa alone with her reflection and information worth more than the diamonds glittering around the necks of every woman upstairs. She walked into a room of killers and stole all their secrets. Subscribe to witness her brilliance, and comment red if you think Lisa is the real boss here. They didn't speak during the drive back to the mansion, the silence between them heavy with everything Lisa had learned and everything Insu had watched her collect. The city rolled past the tinted windows, neon bleeding into darkness, and she could feel him beside her like a storm contained in human form, pressure building toward some inevitable break. He didn't go to his wing when they arrived. He followed her to hers, past the guards who suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere, through doors that closed behind them with the finality of a decision that couldn't be unmade. Lisa set down her clutch, her fingers working to remove the earrings that had felt like surveillance equipment all evening. Minji Park gave me the access codes for Biko Enterprises. Fibonacci sequence. 3 banks. I can trace the money by morning and have names by. My father built this empire on the bones of men who trusted him. Insu's voice cut through her efficiency, raw in a way she'd never heard. He stood by the window, his back to her, one hand pressed against the glass as if he could push through it into the night beyond. I was 9 years old when I watched him cut a man's throat for stealing $5,000. He made me hold the bowl to catch the blood. Said I needed to understand the price of loyalty. Lisa's hands stilled, the earring forgotten. I was 17 when he tattooed the first dragon on my ribs. 19 when he made me kill someone to prove I was worthy of his legacy. 23 when he died and left me this. He gestured at nothing and everything, at the mansion and the empire and the life sentence wrapped in expensive suits. A throne I never wanted in a kingdom built on suffering. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, the mask was completely gone. What remained was exhaustion, the kind that lived in bone marrow, that couldn't be fixed with sleep or money or power. You asked me once if I chose this life. The answer is no. I inherited it. And the moment I took my father's place, I became him. Every choice he made, I'm bound to honor. Every alliance he forged, I must maintain. Every enemy he created, I must face. Lisa moved toward him slowly, the way she'd approached him when he was bleeding, when the predator was wounded enough to be human. Then break it. Dismantle it. You found me to audit your accounts. Let me audit your entire empire and burn it down from the inside. You don't understand what you're suggesting. But his eyes held something dangerous, something that looked almost like hope. These families, these alliances, they're not contracts you can dissolve with paperwork. They're written in blood. Walking away means war. It means everyone I've ever protected becomes a target. It means you finally get to choose. Lisa stood close enough now that she could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the weight of years lived as someone else's legacy. You didn't choose to become the silent dragon. You didn't choose to inherit your father's sins. But you can choose to end it. Not by dying, not by running, but by systematically destroying everything he built until there's nothing left to inherit. Insu stared at her as if she'd suggested something obscene and holy in the same breath. They'll kill us both. Probably. She said it without flinching. But I didn't sign a contract to help you survive your empire, Insu. I signed it to do a job. So let me do it. Let me find every ghost, every lie, every weak point. Let me give you the ammunition to collapse it all. He reached out then, his tattooed hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she could feel him trembling, the control finally fracturing under the weight of possibility. If we do this, if we actually succeed, I won't be the silent dragon anymore. I'll just be a man. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be just a man. Lisa turned her face into his palm, her eyes never leaving his. Then we'll figure it out together. One audit at a time. He kissed her then, not with dominance or possession, but with the desperation of someone drowning who'd finally found air. And Lisa kissed him back, sealing a promise more dangerous than any contract she'd ever signed. The monster just admitted he's a prisoner. Can they truly escape the life? Subscribe to find out, and comment where you are watching from if you believe they can leave the Mafia behind. The ledgers covered her bed like evidence at a crime scene. Financial statements bleeding into laptop screens that cast blue light across tangled sheets. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, the boundaries had blurred, between planning and passion, between strategy and surrender, between the forensic accountant and the woman who'd fallen into bed with a man whose empire she was systematically dismantling. Insu sat against the headboard, his chest bare, tattoos mapping the history he was trying to escape. Lisa lay beside him wearing his shirt, her braids falling across financial projections that showed the slow death of everything his father had built. Her laptop balanced on her knees, spreadsheets multiplying across multiple screens, each one a surgical incision into the syndicate's infrastructure. Here. She traced a line of transactions with her finger, her other hand resting on his thigh in casual intimacy that would have seemed impossible 3 weeks ago. The Jeju operations funnel through this holding company. If we freeze these accounts simultaneously with the Biko exposure, they can't move liquid assets to cover the gap. The whole northern network collapses within 72 hours. Insu leaned forward, his arm wrapping around her waist as he studied the screen, his breath warm against her neck. The Jeju families will retaliate. Minji gave you that information, but her loyalty has limits. Which is why we give her an exit. Lisa pulled up another document, a restructuring proposal she'd been crafting for days. We create a legitimate shipping subsidiary, clean money, clean operations. Offer her controlling interest in exchange for testimony about the Biko accounts. She gets to keep her empire, just without the blood. He was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her hip, thoughtful and possessive at once. You're giving her what I want. An escape that looks like victory. She's not you. Lisa turned in his arms, her hands framing his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. She chose this life. You inherited it. There's a difference. He kissed her then, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that said things neither of them had words for yet. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, their breathing synchronized. Show me the rest. She pulled up document after document, each one a component of systematic destruction. The shell companies that would be exposed to international authorities. The blackmail material they'd leverage to force cooperation. The timing sequence that would prevent any single family from warning the others before the collapse cascaded through the entire network. It's beautiful. Insu's voice carried something like awe. Terrible and beautiful. You're going to destroy everything my father spent 40 years building in less than a week. Not destroy. Lisa closed the laptop, turning fully to face him. Dismantle. There's a difference. Destruction is chaos. This is surgery. We're cutting out the cancer and leaving behind what can be salvaged. He pulled her onto his lap, her legs wrapping around his waist, the laptop and ledgers forgotten as his hands slid beneath the shirt she wore. And what do we salvage? What's left when the empire falls? Lisa kissed him, her fingers threading through his hair, feeling the tension in his shoulders, the years of carrying weight that was never meant to be his. Us. A life where you choose what you build instead of maintaining what you inherited. A life where these, she traced the dragons on his ribs, the scripture along his side, are just art, not autobiography. They made love again as dawn crept through the windows, urgent and tender, sealing promises that went deeper than contracts or plans. And when exhaustion finally claimed them, they fell asleep tangled in each other and financial documents. Two people who'd found something they weren't looking for in the architecture of collapse. Hours later, Lisa woke first, her body pressed against his warmth, his arm heavy across her waist. She reached for her phone, checking encrypted messages from Minji, from contacts in international banking, from the network she'd been quietly building. Everything was in place. Every domino positioned. Insu stirred beside her, his eyes opening, finding hers with immediate focus despite the sleep still clinging to him. It's time. Lisa nodded, her heart hammering with anticipation and terror. It's time. He sat up, transformation happening in real time as the man became the mask became the silent dragon one last time. Then let's end this. Before I reveal the truth, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. This twist changes everything. The first bomb detonated at 9:47 in the morning, Seoul time, when Lisa's finger pressed enter and $12 million in Biko Enterprises accounts froze simultaneously across 3 continents. She watched the screen from Insu's private office, surrounded by guards who understood she was the trigger finger for something catastrophic, their hands resting on weapons they hoped they wouldn't need. Insu stood across the room on a call with his attorney, his voice measured and cold, activating the legal mechanisms they'd prepared. By 10:15, authorities in Singapore had received anonymous packages containing irrefutable evidence of money laundering. By 10:30, Seoul prosecutors were reviewing documentation of fraud that stretched back 7 years. The second bomb was Minji's testimony, delivered via video conference to 3 different law enforcement agencies. Her face calm as she dismantled the Jeju operations with surgical precision, naming names, citing dates, providing account numbers that would take investigators years to fully unravel. In exchange, her immunity agreement sat signed and sealed, her new shipping subsidiary already incorporated and clean. Lisa's phone erupted with messages, threats, demands, confusion from families who were watching their empires liquefy in real time. She'd built the sequence to cascade, each frozen account triggering investigations that exposed the next, dominoes falling with mathematical precision. The third bomb was the hardest. Lisa pulled up the master file, the one that contained everything, every shell company, every political bribe, every murder hidden in accounting irregularities. Her cursor hovered over send, the recipient list including the FBI, Interpol, the Korean National Police, and 3 international news organizations. Once this goes, there's no walking it back, she said without turning around. Insu ended his call, moving to stand behind her, his hand settling on her shoulder. Send it. She did. The office exploded into chaos within minutes. Phones ringing, guards shouting, the sound of vehicles arriving too fast in the courtyard below. Lisa's screens showed bank accounts freezing in real time, assets being seized, warrants being issued. The empire was hemorrhaging from 1,000 cuts, and there was no tourniquet that could stop it. They're here. One of the guards spoke into his radio, his weapon drawn. East Gate. 20 vehicles. Armed. Insu's expression didn't change. He'd known this moment would come, had prepared for it with the same precision Lisa had applied to the financial collapse. Get her to the safe room. No. Lisa stood, her hand finding his. We do this together or not at all. The look he gave her contained volumes. Protest, admiration, terror, love. You don't know what's coming. I know exactly what's coming. Men who built their lives on your father's empire, watching it die, and wanting someone to bleed for it. She squeezed his hand. But they're too late. The money's gone. The power's gone. All that's left is violence, and violence without purpose is just noise. The first gunshot shattered a window. Guards returned fire, the mansion transforming into a war zone. Insu pulled Lisa behind his desk, his body shielding hers, one hand holding a weapon she'd never seen him carry, the other keeping her close. The police are 7 minutes out, he said, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. Minji confirmed they're coming. We just have to survive 7 minutes. 6 minutes. A guard went down, clutching his shoulder. The safe room's entrance opened, more security pouring out, creating a perimeter. Lisa's laptop showed more accounts freezing, more arrests happening globally. The collapse was complete. What remained was just the dying thrashing of something already dead. 4 minutes. The attackers breached the first floor. Shouting in Korean, demands for Insu to come out, to face what he'd done. He stayed behind the desk, weapon trained on the door, his free hand tangled with Lisa's. 2 minutes. Sirens in the distance, growing closer. The attackers heard them too, their assault becoming desperate, reckless. 30 seconds. The doors burst open, not attackers, but police, tactical units flooding the mansion with the overwhelming force of law finally catching up to decades of carefully maintained immunity. 0. Insu set down his weapon, hands raised, meeting Lisa's eyes with something that looked almost like peace. It's over. Hold up, subscribe first. Then comment your location. Now brace yourself. This story is about to explode. The indoor garden had survived the raids, the investigations, the systematic dismantling of everything the Bong family had built over 2 generations. Lisa stood among the bamboo and orchids, morning light filtering through glass panels that had somehow escaped the gunfire, watching water trickle over smooth stones as if the world outside hadn't fundamentally changed. 18 months. That's what the prosecutor had offered Insu in exchange for testimony that would put 14 syndicate leaders away for life. 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by probation and the kind of freedom that came with permanent surveillance and the knowledge that he'd betrayed everyone his father had called allies. He'd taken the deal without hesitation. Lisa had testified too, walking judges and juries through the financial architecture of an empire built on ghost companies and blood money. Her forensic reconstruction had been so thorough, so devastating, that 3 families had collapsed before trials even began, their networks exposed and dismantled with the precision of a surgeon removing tumors. The contract that had brought her to Seoul, the 100 pages that had traded 1 year of her life for her family's freedom, had been voided by mutual agreement. Her family's debts were paid. Her brother was in rehabilitation, clean for the first time in years. Her mother had stopped calling her a traitor for what she'd done, though forgiveness remained a conversation they hadn't yet finished. Lisa pulled the envelope from her jacket pocket, the one that had arrived yesterday via courier, no return address. Inside were 2 items: keys to a property she'd never heard of, and a photograph of a house by the water, somewhere that looked like it existed outside the geography of their previous lives. No note. No explanation. Just keys and a location and the implicit question of whether she'd still be waiting when his 18 months ended. She'd spent the past year rebuilding herself in the wreckage of what they'd destroyed. A quiet life in Chicago, consulting work with the FBI, teaching forensic accounting at Northwestern. Ordinary things. Safe things. The kind of existence she'd always planned before a 100-page contract had dragged her into a world where love and destruction became indistinguishable. But she dreamed of him every night. His hands on her skin. His voice in the darkness, revealing truths that should have terrified her. The way he'd looked at her in that final moment before the police took him away. Not with regret, but with something that looked dangerously close to hope. Footsteps behind her. Soft on the garden's stone path. Lisa turned, her heart already knowing before her mind caught up. Insu stood at the garden's entrance, thinner than she remembered, the expensive suits replaced by simple clothes that made him look younger, almost vulnerable. The tattoos were still there, visible at his collar and wrists, permanent reminders of a life he could never completely erase. They let you out early. Her voice barely worked, trapped between disbelief and something fiercer. Good behavior. Cooperation. Testimony that put away men who'll die in prison. He moved toward her slowly, as if approaching something fragile. And maybe because Min-ji has friends in the justice system who owed her favors. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the changes in him, the way prison had stripped away the last vestiges of the silent dragon, leaving only the man underneath. Uncertain. Hopeful. Terrified. I bought the house 8 months ago. I didn't know if you'd come. If you'd want. He stopped, the words catching on everything they hadn't said, everything that remained unfinished between them. Lisa held up the keys, let them catch the light. I came. The house is clean. No connections to anything from before. Just a place. By the water. Where we could. He stopped again, and she realized he was asking a question he didn't know how to voice. She closed the distance between them, her hand finding his face, tracing the line of his jaw. Where we could start over. Build something that's ours, not inherited. Not bought or sold or written in blood. Insu's hand covered hers, his eyes holding questions about futures neither of them could guarantee. And if I don't know how? If I fail at being just a man? Lisa smiled, fierce and certain. Then we'll fail together. One honest choice at a time. She kissed him then, in a garden that had survived everything, sealing a promise that had no contract, no witnesses, no guarantees except the ones they'd forged themselves. Behind them, beyond the glass, Seoul continued its endless rhythm. But here, in this moment, there was only the two of them and the terrifying possibility of beginning again. The keys pressed between their palms, cold metal warming to flesh, holding the shape of a future neither of them had dared to imagine when a contract first brought them together. Insoo pulled back just enough to whisper against her lips, "When do we leave?" Lisa looked into his eyes, seeing both the man he'd been and the man he was choosing to become, and smiled. "Whenever you're ready." His fingers laced through hers, holding tight, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his expression that looked like pure, uncomplicated joy. "Then let's go home. Thank you so much for riding with us until the very end of Lisa and Insoo's journey. It proves that even in the darkest worlds, intelligence and true love can burn down empires to build something beautiful. Now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this story gripped you the most? Was it Lisa's brilliant financial moves, or the moment the silent dragon finally let his guard down? Drop your favorite moment in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share this video with someone who loves a powerful queen taking charge. Your support helps us bring more epic tales to life. See you in the next one.